Hi, everybody. This is Martha Creek at 6 o'clock on March the 1st Central Time. It is absolute privilege and blessing to be here with you in service tonight as we look at our own humanness and the humanness of us and the divinity of us and the potential that that holds, and particularly the crossroads of that. This call is being recorded. It's a workshop and a class. There's a presenter here that's extraordinary in talent and skill and what he's lived through and written about in a book that we'll be referring to. At any time you want to share and not be recorded, you're absolutely welcome to do that. So you can just put your hand up and say, stop the want to be recorded, and you won't be. The recording would be stopped. The recording is available then after this class for you to have and listen to again. And it's available for people that would want to be here tonight, that are planning to be here the other 4 weeks of March. This will be every Tuesday night in March for 5 weeks consecutive at the same time with the same link that you use tonight. It's also, you're welcome to invite people to join. So if you're getting something out of it and you believe somebody else is, particularly somebody that is stuck in some pain or suffering, or in any level of grief that could use some bolstering up or support, new perception shifts, a transformation, just some human heartedness, just a hug to their heart, please, please, please invite them. That meets the objectives for the class here. You can contact me, marthacreek.com, if you have questions or comments to me specifically at any time. That's the website, and that's where you can send to others if they need the link, or you can just give the link to them directly. All right, a big deep breath as we open here. Aware of the heart that looks like it's yours. And aware of the resilience of the heart, what it has carried, what it has felt, what it has witnessed, what it has enjoyed, the ups and the downs, the rounds and rounds. The journey from being wounded to being healed will take exactly as long as it needs to. I know you want to rush to get your scar as soon as you can. But my love, recovery isn't meant to be a race. It's often a slow walk down a 5-mile curvy country road. Take your time coming back to yourself. Let your repairs happen carefully. Mend your heart. Mend your heart like it's a cathedral. Mend your heart like it's a cathedral that is being gently restored. One carefully laid brick. One carefully laid mosaic tile. One carefully laid even a shard of stained glass at a time. My love, your scars will come when they come. And someday they will teach you a master class in how strong you are. But in the meantime, nurse your wound like a newborn. In the meantime, nurse your wound like a newborn, slowly, thoughtfully, and with the softest of thoughts. My love, the sound of your heart the sound of your heart, present to the sound of your heart, the sound that your heart makes as it heals, is my most favorite psalm. Don't rush through the verses of your sacred recuperation. Let your lyrics echo. Let them linger. Let them dawdle. Let them hang in the air like fireflies. Until they surround you. Until they surround you and help you stand on your feet again. Your comeback starts now. However, not with a foot race on a hard pavement. But rather, your return to yourself will begin with a meandering walk down a stretching dirt path under a cotton candy sky. My love, don't set your watch to your healing. Don't give it a deadline. Instead, give it all the time it needs to replant the garden of your flowering purpose. Oh, my love. Oh, my love. I wish you could see what I see. I wish you could see how incredibly beautiful you look while you heal. A reading from John Rodell in a book called Remedy. Okay. Kleenex intact. Something to write on, maybe, some note taking, some big hug to your heart as we start. It's an absolute privilege. When I called John last year, the first time, and thank you, Elizabeth, for connecting me with him. When I said I'm being given a spiritual mandate to work in the field of grief and in the arena of grief, the first words out of Elizabeth's mouth is, you have to meet John Welshons. She was right. He said yes to stepping into that series 5 weeks last year in June, without any hesitation, to bring forth what he knows to be true about the topic, awakening from grief. This is the book, how it looks. It's beautiful. And the subtitle is Finding the Way Back to Joy. So highly recommend the book. I've sent it to some of you. And for those of you that haven't discovered it yet, I can highly recommend it. And John, I don't have words that would properly thank you for being here tonight and for saying yes again to this launching of another journey through our heart to awaken from grief and to find our way back to joy. So anything you want to say before I start my litany of questions to you so that we can promote our healing tonight?
First of all, I'd just like to say thank you, Martha, for sharing your beautiful heart with all of us. And thank you to everyone who is here this evening. I'm always so inspired to see a group of people who will come together to talk about the most difficult experiences in our human lives. And in that process, to be awakened to or reassured that we are so much bigger and more resilient and resourceful than we ever realized. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, for bringing their hurting hearts and their open hearts and their open minds. And it's a privilege. So thank you, Martha, for bringing us together.
Thank you too, John. So I've put the name of the book and John's website over there. And I'll introduce you to, there's other people here on the call tonight that are going to be with us in the coming weeks that have a great deal of experience in grief, and our grief recovery specialist and minister serving those in grief support fields and other matters. So I'll get to that toward the end of the call if you're wondering about that. John, the book says, this is from Dr. Wayne Dyer, says about John and his writing, that this book will help you to heal your heart. It also says to rediscover your own infinite inner resources. And that's what you just spoke about, John, the ability of the person to do that. And it's my favorite part. You've likely heard me say it already about our humanness, and about the human is resilience, the ability to resource, regardless of what they've lived through, what they've gone through, what's happened, the ability to get up and continue to do something or to continue to give something, even in their times of the deepest hurts. If you honor the spirit of this work, eventually you too will come to know in your deepest self, in your deepest intuition, that everything that has happened in your life has happened not to make you eternally sad, but to help you recognize that you are eternally loving, regardless of what happens. So bless us all through this awakening. So we dedicate this time and place for just that we get back in touch with this. So John, the questions around grief often come with questions like why, and why me, and the pain of that. And it's what I've heard as a little kid. I remember in some of the losses in my family of hearing this wailing, why? So I'd like to start tonight with you responding to that. Anything you can that could shed a light on that immediate response of that immediate reaction to that from a hurting heart, or from the mind that's so in delusion about what life includes, including losses.
Well, it's actually one of my favorite questions, partially because there's no answer to it. And therefore it is, in fact, in the follow-up book to Awakening from Grief, which is When Prayers Aren't Answered, there's a whole chapter about the question why. because that's what the mind immediately asks. When something happens in our lives that we didn't want, we didn't expect, we, you know, a loss, a disappointment, a betrayal, a war, um, and the mind starts wailing, why me? Why this? Why now? And I think that that question, although incredibly natural for us to ask, is something that keeps us stuck in our grief, in the sense that I think there really is generally no answer to it. Now, we make up answers, you know, and some of them are actually in themselves kind of unkind. You know, I'm thinking about the many friends who have said to me when they've lost a child that the worst thing that happened to them was when their friends said, or some clergy person said, God wanted another angel in heaven. Um, you know, the fact that we're here talking about this is so profound because we're so much at a loss in this culture to know how to work with these issues. One of the things that strikes me is that very often when we have a major loss in our life, um, there's the feeling that some of our dearest friends have just kind of disappeared. And I started to realize at a certain point that that isn't because they don't care, that's because they don't know what to say and they don't know what to do. And they're afraid to say something that might make things worse. So it's easier to just kind of fade into the background. I was talking with a friend the other day, and I was remembering my sister Carol, who I interviewed for Awakening from Grief, because a few years earlier, she had lost her 38-year-old son, her first child. She had 5 children, but he was quite dear to her since he was the first. Delightful human being. And she talked about all of the things that were said and done that weren't helpful. So I finally said to her, well, what was helpful? What was most helpful to you? And she said, well, I have 2 friends who are neighbors, and they come over to my house and cry with me. And I thought that was so precious and so insightful, because what we realize is that in these moments, what we most need is just the feeling that people we love and care about are there for us. There are no answers. There are no easy explanations. Whether we want to say God needed another angel in heaven, or it was karma, or, you know, whatever it doesn't matter, because the heart is hurting. One last thing I'll share. I have a dear friend who has become a friend. She came to see me when her 21-year-old son died. And about the third or fourth time that I saw her, she shared with me that her son was speaking to her all the time, her deceased son. And I said, really? I said, well, what does he say? And she started telling me some of the things he was saying, and it was like some of these channeled teachings that we hear from really high spiritual teachers. And I'm just blown away as she's saying this to me. And I'm thinking, my goodness, you know, this could be of help to a lot of people if you would share with the public what your deceased son is saying to you. And she said, no, you don't understand. I want my son back. I don't want some spook whispering in my ear. I want my son back. And I thought that was so honest and so forthright. And it's that kind of honesty that really begins to help us through our grief.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And the reminder of it, John, I was thinking too, I invited some of you to put your comments and your commentary and your ideas and from your takeaways, anything that you want to put in the chat, you're welcome to do that. And I would be encouraging you to think about some of the things that's been said to you in your times of grief that caused your skin to crawl off, that was not helpful, even though it was meant to be helpful. I saw some of your faces when John said, God got another angel, or God needed another angel, or God takes the best, or something like that. These attempts to ease this that aren't. So that could, if that could help your processing and your feeling a healing of your own heart, to just put out there what people have said to you, even with good intent, good friends, family members, loving, kind people, whatever, how it fell heavy on your heart, because we can get some education too around this and some information from people that have lived this already, that we know that we can stop some of this ourselves if we have any inclination to continue to do this. John, I was struck too about a comment that you made in the book, about you realizing that what the fear was a fear of life, that although it looked like a fear of death, and that through this work and your visualizations and your new understanding and shifts in perception, you understood this is the fear of life. So what John said in the book is this: I realized that it couldn't be alleviated by a belief in the afterlife. That this pain, this sorrow, this grief cannot be alleviated by a belief in the afterlife. Now, this is John's realization. That may serve you, I don't know. But it's like, it doesn't serve me. It no longer. It had nothing to do with the afterlife. It was a fear of life. It was a fear about not living. It was the startling realization that if I had been given a terminal diagnosis by my doctor that day, that I would have been devastated. I would have felt that in 25 years of being alive, that I had not ever really lived. So my daddy said it as, honey, people are so afraid of dying, they don't actually live. That was his 5th grade education way of saying it. So I'd love you to speak a little bit more about that, honey.
Oh, wow. Well, now that I've lived almost 3 times that long, yeah, I think that it's fascinating to see how many people there are on Earth who believe fervently in life after death. I'm not saying that's not true, but who believe fervently in life after death, but are terrified of dying. And even believe fervently that that could be a better life. Well, I don't know. This is the one we have right now. This moment is when we're alive. And, I was just looking at Awakening from Grief tonight, and I'm sure you saw the very first quote I included in the book was from Joseph Campbell. And he said, people say that what we're seeking is a meaning for life. He said, I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're really seeking is an experience of being alive, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. And that really made an impression on me, really touched my heart. And I started thinking about the rapture of being alive. What does that mean? And I started to realize how most of us sleepwalk through life. We're trained to sleepwalk through life. What I mean is, we're trained to look at life as something that's going to happen later. Like, I'll be happy later. I've thought about, there's a whole thing about how when I was about 5 years old, I realized that I couldn't possibly be happy until I could drive a car. Well, that was going to be 12 years of misery until I could drive a car. The first thing I did when I learned how to drive a car was I wrecked my mother's car. So it didn't make her happy or me. So, and it goes on from there. It's kind of like, well, when I'm not happy now, so maybe when I go to college, I'll be happy. And then you get to college and say, maybe when I graduate, I'll be happy. And then you graduate and say, well, when I get a good job, I'll be happy. And then no. And then when I find the perfect partner and marry, I'll be happy. And then, well, when we have children, I'll be happy. And then it's like, well, when the children are out of diapers, I'll be happy. And then when the children are out of the house, I'll be happy. And if somewhere in there something intercedes and somebody you love dearly dies, or there's a divorce, or something that upends your life, that's when we're really faced with the realization that we haven't ever really lived, because we're always looking toward the future or looking toward the past, saying, well, I was so happy when I was a teenager. I was miserable when I was a teenager, but some people are happy. Looking to the past and saying, well, I was happy then, but I'm not happy now, and maybe I'll never be happy again. And I started to look at the teachings that really in surround us with the concept that the only moment we have is now. No matter what's going on in life, no matter what has happened in the past, the only moment we have is now. What's happened in the past is really just a collection of dreams that we hang on to in our minds. What may or may not happen in the future is just a bunch of dreams that we cling to in our mind, either our dream that we will be happy, something wonderful will happen, or our fear that something terrible will happen. We don't know. We don't know. So being fully alive really becomes the process of learning to be alive now. And the last thing I'll say about it, Martha, is, I'm always struck by the fact that we ask each other as human beings in social interaction, how are you doing? Is everything fine? It's like we want to answer the question before we hear the real answer. And of course we say, oh yes, fine, everything's fine. So a number of years ago, I started, when people say that to me, I say, when has everything ever been fine? Some things are wonderful and some things are horrible. That's the way life is. And, they kind of look at me like, well, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's a radical shift in perception.
yeah,
And mention a circuit breaking of an old inertia that's been there of fine, 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 although we don't feel fine, or
right.
think we're not fine, haven't been fine, and we're worried there won't ever be fine. So this is an invitation then for me, as I read this, it's like for me not to wait on that. And I've been watching movies since Olivia died last year in July, after our series in June. And part of my healing, part of the guidance I had around healing that was to watch movies daily, a movie a day for 30 days. Now, I'm not really a watcher. I don't use TV much. And it's like, this is an intervention for me, like to do it. And it got me in touch with some of what you're describing, that it is the denial that there was goods and bad parts of it. And you shared a story with me during one of our conversations since then, John, about a friend of yours that's dad died. And he was referring to the man as though it was a different man than who the man actually was.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask him, what man are you talking about? I happen to know your father.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to know what he was like. I happen to know that he did some things that were not all that saintly, and that you've now trying to make a saint out of him, deceased. So speak a little bit about the tendencies of that either this demonizing somebody or making them a saint, like that's prolonging this ache in our heart, that's prolonging some of this pain when we have tendencies to do either of those.
Well, Martha, that's such a wonderful question. And I always look back to the line in the Bible that says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Now, I think of that not just as ultimate spiritual truth, but truth right here on earth. What is the truth? Well, in the case of the friend of mine that you're talking about, his father was an abusive alcoholic, as my father was. His father was unkind. His father was unreliable. His father was violent. And when his father died, he's talking about him like he's talking about St. Francis of Assisi. And I thought, well, that's nice, but it's not honest. And I don't think that glossing over, putting a veneer of something sweet on something that was not so sweet, is going to help in the healing of grief, because to heal grief, we have to heal the reality that we dealt with. There's a tremendous amount of grief in living with someone who's addicted, who's an alcoholic, or a drug addict, to dealing with someone whose personality is never consistent. You never know who you're going to come home to. And so healing the grief of that doesn't come from trying to turn them into somebody they weren't. On the other hand, I always applaud anything that anybody wants to do or can do to come to a place of forgiveness for whatever it was that was done. And so we work a lot with that too, so that we're forgiving the truth of the situation rather than glossing it over with some fantasy that never existed.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've also worked before you and some of the others got on the call tonight. I was talking about the series and my calling to do it last year, and then I feel like it's a spiritual mandate to repeat to do another series of this. And the question was about my resistance to it. Like how would I explain the resistance I have to working in the arena of grief and leading a series to have these difficult conversations and to go into these wounded part of our hearts, some of these deepest losses and tragedies, atrocities. I mean, everything that's happened in the human. And I know in my own life, part of my healing is that I have to come out of the delusion that life doesn't include these things, that I'm going to have a life that's free of suffering, that I'm going to have a life that's free of death and loss and divorce and disease and diagnosis, and to heal that delusion about that. And one of the resistances I got in touch with was being in arenas and in crowds and colleagues and other members of friends and other things that was into what I now call a toxic positivity.
That's a great term.
Positivity, and how it is not helpful, was not helpful. And this denial that I saw with some of my closest friends, with their, in one case, one's coming to mind, with his husband at the door of death within a few hours of dying, and still absolutely saying, no, it's not true. This is not possible. We'll just get him into a hospital. They'll drain off the fluid off his lungs. He's going to be fine. And me saying, no, he is within hours of dying, and how of trying to convey that. And I understand denial. I have denial, and I work every day to have less of it and to not spin a positive and now toxically positive web around the realities of life that include these things, all of these things. So that then what a bitter pill it can be to know that loss is an inevitable part of our human journey. Loss is an inevitable part of this life, of this journey that we're in. And this is a quote from you and the book again. Our choice is to either remain in pain and remain in bitterness, or to learn how to use the experience to grow into a richer life, to use that experience to like fertilize our own life, to even to grow into a richer life, even with the loss. It is in that sense that loss then is a gift, whether you're in a place now to call it that. I realize that's a stretch, even for me and for many. And if I can see it, that I may never ever call it a gift, but I know for sure that every loss I've had has made a better heart in me. I have a better heart today because of the losses that I've had. And in that last one that I spoke about Olivia, it's like my heart dissolved. It was a feeling of the heart dissolved. And over time and with work and effort and process, I felt like my heart had a reformation. So it's clear to me now that even that was painful, that loss and other losses that I've had, that I've used it, and that my heart is a stronger, softer, bigger, more compassionate, loving heart. And it's what I see in all of these people on here tonight. I know most of them personally, and every single one of them has the qualities that you spoke about in the book that happens when you actually heal through grief, that you end up more compassionate, more understanding, more able to serve humanity, more willing to listen, more deeply devoted. And that these are the traits, the characteristics that most of us value. So whether we can call it a gift or not, it's at a minimum, it has certainly been used for good in some of us. And I know that because I've witnessed you heal through extreme losses, many of you, and still healing through them too. So it is in this sense that this gift will open our hearts if we let it, and a gift that can help us uncover the extraordinary love that we've always hoped for and never dared to imagine was always within us. So speak a little bit about that, John, your response or commentary on the gifts of the losses.
Wow. Well, and one thing I do want to pick up on from something you said previously, and then we'll come back to this, but when you were talking about denial, Martha, there's a story in Awakening from Grief about a fellow who was dying of AIDS back in the early 80s, another friend of mine. And I was going to visit him periodically, and he was sort of, going downhill, because in those days, AIDS was pretty much 100% fatal. And I went to visit him in the hospital. I'd been seeing him maybe every 2 or 3 weeks for a couple of years. And I went to visit him in the hospital, and he was really sick. I mean, like, having worked with a number of people who had died at that point already, I could see that he was within hours of dying. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if he had died while I was there. And I sat with him, and I sat with his wife for a while, and finally I left to go home, and I said, well, let me know how things go. Well, I'm expecting to get a call later that day that he passed, and, we're going to have the memorial service, so-and-so, and didn't come. Next day didn't come. 4 or 5 days went past, and I thought, wait, I haven't heard anything from Laura about Ted. So I called her up, and somebody else answered the phone at their house, and they said, oh, Ted's coming home today. And I said, what? And he wound up living another 2 years, I think it was. And that was a very interesting time. It was kind of like he was resurrected for a period of time, you know? And so all I would say about that is that in terms of denial, the other side of that we used to talk about was cultivating what we call don't know mind. That is to say, I have no idea what's going to happen. You know, I can say what looks like the probability right now, but how do we know what's going to happen at any given time? And I do remember Elizabeth Kubler-Ross saying, one thing we must never do is take away someone's hope. So, you know, this is all a balance, and it really requires those of us who are doing the work to really go deeply into our hearts all the time and try to hear what's the right strategy or the right response in this moment, because it may not be the same one that was in the last moment that looked like this. It might be entirely different. So there's that. And you know, I think that there's so much that we can learn. And the idea of loss being a gift, I think the easiest way to express it or to recognize it in our own lives is to think of the most difficult things we've gone through. Now, I'm sure some of the people who are on the call tonight are right in the middle of going through the most difficult thing they've ever gone through. So this may seem a little pie in the sky, but for others among us, most of us can look back on our lives and look at the things that we went through that were the most difficult. And when we look back on them, we start to realize that was the worst thing I ever went through. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I never want to go through it again. But boy, did I grow from that. Boy, did I grow. And, you know, to me, there's a vivid example of this happening right now on the world stage. You know, the man who is president of the Ukraine was a comedian. And when Russia started threatening Ukraine, everybody rushed to say, oh, this poor man, he's in way over his head. He's not going to be able to handle this. Now they're looking at him and saying, what an inspiration he is. He has obviously dug very deep in himself and found a wellspring of courage and resolve and strength that I don't know if he knew he had it, but a lot of the people around him didn't know he had it. So that's the kind of thing that many of us find when we're in the midst of something. If we thought about it ahead of time, we say, oh, no, I could never handle that. But when you're in the middle of it, you just kind of figure out how to handle it. And you realize that you've got a lot more strength than you ever knew you had. And I think that that becomes the doorway into becoming a much more expanded, expansive human being with a much greater capacity to love, because love then isn't so tied to how other people treat you, whether or not the people you love survive. You know, I mean, the death rate is always 100%, and we don't know when anyone is going to die, including ourselves. So all of those things can be taken as gifts from the universe, in the sense that if we really look at it honestly, if we look at the truth honestly, we recognize that any day could be our last day on earth or the last for someone we love. And if we think about that, we could become neurotic and nervous and depressed, or we could say, well, if that's the case, then I better really wake up today. I better really pay attention to my relationships today and what I do and what I think and how I act. And if this were to be my last day on earth, how would I spend it? if this would be the last time I ever spoke to you or saw you, how would I like to talk to you? You know, those are the things that really wake us up in life. And sometimes it takes one or two great losses to get us to that place if we'll go. Sometimes we go kicking and screaming. But the alternative is, you know, as that passage you read says, the alternative is to remain bittered and frightened and, you know, angry. And if this was my last day on earth, do I want to spend it embittered, frightened, and angry? No. I want to live life fully today, in spite of all that's going on.
Yeah.
And
In
all
spite
the,
of,
go ahead.
yeah, in spite of it. Like, it doesn't deny that it's there. The losses, the pain, the suffering, the angst, the worry, and this grief, of course, what we'll be looking at during these 5 weeks is not just the death, not just death, but diagnosis, dismemberment, this divorce. One of the women put a note in here about one of the griefs that she's in is the loss of a promise to be together. I call it the loss of my imagined future. That's deep, deep loss, that it didn't turn out the way we said, the way we vowed, the way we promised. And then the underpinning of that can be, I wasn't worth it. I wasn't worth loving. I wasn't working hard. I wasn't worth working hard for, and things like that. So we've got a lot of mentation that's the absolute core and suffering of some of this grief. So we've got the loss itself, but we've got this core suffering about not being worthy, not being lovable, not being okay. That's also part of this. So we'll be addressing some of this. Do you want to speak to that, John, before we go on? Like, not just the loss itself, but this imagination that we had about, and you spoke about that last year in our series there, that some of the biggest basis of grief is our delusion about what I call it, I don't think that was your words, but reality as it is versus our fantasy-based notions of reality.
Yeah, well, in that wonderful book that Byron Katie wrote called Loving What Is, you know, she says the source of our suffering is basically our arguments with reality. And the human mind's tendency to say, well, I must be getting punished for something. I must have done something horrible in a previous life, or I'm just a wretch in this life and I'm getting what I deserve, or why is the universe so cruel? Or, you know, the point is, if you don't recognize that difficult things happen in every human life, it's really hard to be happy, because then you think, I've been singled out for this. One of the most powerful meditations I know is one of the forms of Tonglen in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Tonglen is among other things, we don't have a lot of time, but basically the form I'm thinking of is a meditation in which we visualize everyone on earth who has experienced or is experiencing the same situation that we're going through right now. Now, when you think about it, you know, one of the most difficult losses for human beings is the loss of a child. Well, it seems like that's not supposed to happen. But then this meditation simply invites you to take a look at how many millions, if not billions, of people there are on earth who have lost children. And the first phase of that is you don't feel so alone. You realize you haven't been singled out for this. How many billions of people have lost spouses, you know, and siblings and friends, and how many people are struggling with health issues right now? How many people have economic problems? So it isn't to say that this, you know, and it is, I'm not suggesting that we get into that state of like, oh, well, I shouldn't feel so bad because there are so many people who are worse off than me. No, I'm saying just look at the people who are in exactly the same boat you're in, not worse off than you are or better off than you are, just exactly the same or close to it, and it's a very peculiar tendency that the human mind has to want to single oneself out for a special kind of suffering. And it's not necessarily true. Suffering is suffering. Um, the mind may say, no, I have a very special form of suffering. It may seem that way. But just look at the fact that one of the things that we do with our minds is say, well, if I had more money, I'd be happier or feel safer or more secure or whatever. I would just invite you to look at what's happening on the world stage right now, to see people who are among the wealthiest people on earth who are terribly insecure and dangerous because they're so insecure. So when we say money doesn't buy happiness, it's quite true. I do know some people who are wealthy who are happy. That's another story. They're usually giving their money away. That's generally what makes them happy. So I think that that is really something we need to watch out for, that we not punish ourselves with our own minds on top of what's already happened, and just kind of acknowledge that every human life faces difficulties.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank you for that. I remember this has been helpful to me many times and again tonight. And I think Roseanne put it in the comments here that just to know that I'm not alone, which is a big fear, a big part of grief, that somebody can relate to this. Somebody has, many millions have experienced something similar, not worse than, not better than, something that. So, but similar, even if you can't say the same as me. They don't know my heart, they don't know my loss, they don't know our love. It's like something similar that keeps me from being alone. And I remember a teacher decades now ago telling me, when I said, as I was preparing to go into ministry, just give me a summary of what I have to know about grief. And I've lived generally like my first memories are of being very sad, of looking around like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And knowing then that if I'm not going to live a life that's sad, that I'm going to have to start healing even as a young kid, that I had to start integrating all that was in life. And this teacher said, regarding grief, you can't do it wrong. You don't have to do it alone. And it'll take longer than you like. And I've drawn on that so many times over these 40 years. And I offer it back tonight based on what you're sharing here, John, that it's going to be part of our journey. It's inevitable in life, and it's not all of life. And that there's people here that can relate to it, that have lived through something similar to this too. It was important to me tonight, John, to have you to speak to some of these messages that we've gotten. And I really related to this based on my earliest memories of sadness, and how the attempts I've made to balance out sadness and be happy, and be joyous and be positive and Pollyanna-ish and all sorts of other things. I was also aware of messages from the culture, from a gender specific, from the family, deep messages from the family that include don't cry, be strong, pull yourself together, keep it together, just don't think about it. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about something more pleasant. Here, one of my friends says when she tries to express grief to her mother, she says she comes over and brings her a burger. So when she starts emoting about the grief and the loss, she goes, just eat your damn burger. Just eat the damn burger. Here, just eat the burger. So that's what we're dealing with. Or here, have a drink.
Oh.
Or here, take this pill. One of the women today said their family members are giving their other family members sleeping pills at the loss of a family member. Here, just take this pill. Here, just take this drink. So all of this has taught us not to grieve. It's taught us avoidance. It's taught us addictions and other things like that. So speak to it if you can, honey. And I'd love to hear your comments, any of you that are willing to put it in the comments. What were some of the messages you got? What's been some of the teachings that you're having to heal through and to undo and shift your perceptions around regarding grief and avoidance of grief? Go ahead, John.
Well, I had a similar story with my mother, and so many of us that have these kind of experiences. When I changed schools after third grade, I went into fourth grade, I went into a new school. I had what I later came to term new kid syndrome. You know, the kids just were brutal, bullying me and picking on me for no reason except that I was the new kid, you know? And I came home one day and I was sobbing, just sobbing. And my mother, you know, God bless her, she came over and she said, "What's the matter, honey?" And I said, "Those kids at that school are terrible." And she went to the refrigerator, opened the door, pulled out a chocolate cake that she had baked earlier that day, cut me a slice and handed it to me and said, "Here, honey, this will make you feel better." And I had an emotional relationship with the refrigerator ever since. It's just something that we do. And as you mentioned, and I don't say that with any sense of, wanting to disparage my mother. She was doing the best she could do in that moment. It was a loving act. But if she had fallen to her knees and wrapped her arms around me and just said, "This really feels awful, doesn't it? Let's just be together and feel what it feels like together. Let's just touch our hearts and hold one another." Very different. I'm inspired. If we have a moment, I'd love to read a quick passage from Thich Nhat Hanh, who died just a couple of weeks ago. Wonderful Buddhist teacher. He died at the age of 95. He said, "The moment I die, I will try to come back to you as quickly as possible. I promise it will not take long. Isn't it true? I'm already with you. As I die each moment, I come back to you in every moment. Just look, feel my presence. If you want to cry, please cry. And know that I will cry with you. The tears you shed will heal us both. Your tears and mine. The earth I tread this morning transcends history. Spring and winter are both present in the moment. The young leaf and the old leaf are really one. My feet touch deathlessness, and my feet are yours. Walk with me now. Let us enter the dimension of oneness and see the cherry tree blossom in winter. Why should we talk about death? I don't need to die to be back with you."
Thank you for that. Yeah, know the truth, and the truth sets you free. So
I love that in there he says, "If you want to cry, please cry, and I will cry with you."
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I think that's important. Somebody put it in the chat that you've already learned, and part of your healing processes has been to feel your feelings, to let the feelings out, no suppressing, depressing, disowning, denying feelings, and that the feelings are to be and can be shared, that you can be witness to your own self as you do that. You certainly can be witnessed by some of us. The question I'd love you to ponder as we meet, before we meet next week at the same time, same place, same Zoom link, is how have you kept from drowning in grief? How have you kept from drowning in sadness? How have you done it? To actually contemplate that, to reflect on that this week, and then we'll open next week with some of the ways that we've done that. And then we've got practitioners here with us. Roseanne here is on the call. She's a grief recovery specialist. If you want to put that over there in the chat, Roseanne, if you want to work with her directly. We've got Reverend Allie Benjamin here. She'll be one of our featured speakers coming up, who's working, who's got a great deal of experience in healing through grief and direct experience, not theoretic experience, and many of you who could. So there's going to be somebody different with us every single week as we journey through these 5 weeks. And pause for a minute as we close and think about something you've heard tonight that you can take with you, that you can take into your own open heart. To know that there's people here that see you, that stand with you, that witness you in all of your human heartedness, the losses, the sadness, the grief around that, and also your breaking heart, it's restoration and renewal. And as I read at the beginning in the poem, to do your darndest not to try to rush that. And if there's any way that I can support you, I put John's contact information there, his website, both titles of the books. These are tremendous resources for this. And John, sincere thanks to you for the decades and decades that you've been serving human heartedness, and for being here tonight with us, for us to get new frameworks and new solid ground around us and whatever we're experiencing as part of life, and the inevitability of life as it includes losses too.
My pleasure to be with you, Martha, always. And thank you for this ministry, this part of your ministry, which is so important. And thank you for working to get past your resistance. You know, it's an interesting thing that I find, and I found years ago, that it was actually when I first met Ram Dass, 1973. And we were talking about what he'd been doing recently, and he said, I've been spending a lot of time with people who are dying. And he seemed happy about it. And he said, I'm finding it to be the highest spiritual teaching I've ever encountered. So it's a fascinating thing that this subject that we tend to want to distance ourselves from can turn out to be one of the most profound subjects, one of the most profound gifts that life can give us.
And the group says, amen. Amen. You're welcome. All of you are welcome for my part. John, thank you again. Thank you, each and every one of you, all 40 some of you that were here. I see you. I know you're here on purpose, and we are here in witness and with a spiritual community here that can stand with you and serve you in many ways yet to be discovered. If you haven't discovered it so far, we're here to do it in the next few weeks. So
I just put my email address in the chat box. If anyone wants to connect directly, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you. And John's on Facebook as well, if you use what I'm now calling social ministry instead of social media. So there's a way to connect there as well, and to join in his meditations and other things, as well as these powerful writings. So I'll end the recording. The class will officially close, and I'll see you next week. Let me know by emailing me directly, marthacreek@gmail.com.